So now I am going to introduce the speaker for this evening. And I asked to do this because I wanted to add kind of a personal element to this speaker that's joining us this evening. I'm going to let you know a few things about Aaron's resume, that he is executive director of PFund Foundation. He's a career fundraiser and nonprofit executive who has supported social justice nonprofits in the Upper Midwest through comprehensive communications, strategic planning, and development. As a certified fundraising executive, he utilizes best practices to support missions important to him and the community. Previously, he worked for Family Tree Clinic, OutFront Minnesota, and the Red Ribbon Ride. He has his Master's of Arts degree in Philanthropy and Development from St. Mary's University of Minnesota. He focused his capstone on the history and practice of white supremacy and philanthropy in the United States. More importantly, he's a friend of mine and a friend of North Dakota. I met him about a year ago. We've had a number of Zoom calls. I'm looking for the time that we actually sit down over a coffee or beer and in person. But in lieu of that, and I just can tell you right now, he is dedicated to his job as being a person representing our community, and not only in his community, specifically Minneapolis-St. Paul, but in the Upper Midwest region. We have many incredible national sponsors and partners who have been really great to work with. It's great to also have a regional friend in PFund. Immediately jumped on the idea of being part of this summit and has some great programs that will affect and impact many young people and older people in our state as well. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Aaron Zimmerman with the PFund Foundation. Aaron?
Well, thank you, Barry. I'm blushing. That was the nicest introduction I've ever received, and I really appreciate our partnership, our friendship, and the chance to be here today. I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here on an evening. At least in Minnesota, it's very cold right now. So glad to be in a home right now and being able to be in community with all of you. My notes are down here. I apologize. I've kind of got like a weird setup here. I'm trying to manage both things at once. So if I'm looking down, it's because my notes are here. My name is Aaron Zimmerman. My pronouns are he, him. And as Barry said, I'm the executive director of PFund Foundation. And actually, while I'm saying that, I'm going to get my presentation pulled up here. So I will hopefully be able to. Okay. Can folks see the full presentation? If for the purposes of this, if you've got your images on the, if all of our photos are on the one side, I'd recommend moving to the left side of your screen because that rainbow motif will be on the side the whole time. So it won't be, so you won't have to worry about the text if that's where your photos are. So let me get started here. I want to first share a little bit about myself. Barry did cover most of it, but I do want to say that I grew up in a rural community in Western Wisconsin. I ended up going to the University of Wisconsin in Madison for my undergraduate degree in Russian, actually, and then moved to Minnesota, where I currently live and work here in Minneapolis. And as Barry said, I have my master's in philanthropy and development. And I'm a certified fundraising executive. And so I've spent my career working on fundraising and building movements and campaigns in order to support our communities. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of LGBT organizations in my, I love the slides, thank you. It was very fun to make this PowerPoint. And I also had to put this photo in here of me because it was a friend of mine took it for a magazine thingy and it was too good to pass up. So that being said, let me share a little bit about PFund Foundation because I think this helps give context to some of the work here. And then also I'm excited to share some things that could potentially, as Barry said, impact some of the young people, as well as people across the lifespan and the organizations that are doing amazing work in North Dakota. We are the only foundation dedicated to supporting LGBTQ individuals and communities in the Upper Midwest. So we represent, or we work to fund individuals and communities in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, North and South Dakota. We are also a community foundation, which means we raise our money from the community all of our decision making is done by the community in support of community. And I know I said community a lot in that description, but I think it's really important to recognize that alternatively to, say, a private or corporate foundation, our money is raised by the community. So we ask for support from individuals and families within the region to essentially pool their money together. We invite community members to review all of our applications and make those decisions. And then that money is dispersed into the community to do some really amazing things. We do that through scholarships. So we give out scholarships ranging from $1,000 to $12,000 for 2- and 4-year programs, credentials, advanced degrees, training programs, leadership institutes, things like that, to help cover the cost of tuition or room and board or other expenses. We also provide grants to LGBTQ organizations across the region. And I'll have more information about that as well later in the presentation. And then lastly, we really focus on leadership development. So things like the North Dakota LGBTQ Summit is part of what we believe in as the way we're going to advance change for our communities. So, you know, what I've titled this presentation is Queerness, Community, and Philanthropy. And that's a recognition of both the space that we're occupying and the identities we bring to the table. And I think it's important to recognize that we live within this ecosystem around what I'm calling like the giving ecosystem, that there's these different factors at play that help support movements, that help support our communities, some on a very formal level and others on a very grassroots level. The first being philanthropy. I kind of call it big P philanthropy, which is foundations like PFund or other foundations across the spectrum of different avenues for giving. Charity being the nonprofit organizations that carry out the work, but also can also be opportunities for giving and providing for our communities. And then the last is mutual aid, which is really a recognition that our communities often seek out one another and build coalitions on a person-to-person level and on a community level in order to support each other through some pretty significant experiences. Let me just take a peek here, make sure I don't miss anything. The piece that I want to bring to everyone's attention here is specifically around how mutual aid organizations or mutual aid is such an integral part of the experience of queer and other marginalized communities. It's often baked into the way that we navigate the world and the way that we seek support. For LGBTQ folks, we often are isolated, especially if you're in a rural area. You are often, many LGBTQ folks are also not accepted by family or by other support systems and often have to seek that out. And so we've got this magical ability to seek out other queer folks in order to build those coalitions and those friendships and seek both the tangible resource type of things that come from mutual aid, but also the connection and relationship. And I think that is something that, the spoiler here is that that's what we want to really tap into as queer folks, as we're funding our movements and our campaigns in order to advance our equity, is that we already have the tools. And although they are unfortunately often caused by violence and ignorance and bigotry and a history of white supremacy and homophobia and transphobia, it uniquely prepares us for the path ahead. And I'll share some examples later on of when we've used that both within systems and outside of systems. And then at the end, what I'm hoping we can do is spend some time in small groups to share a little bit about what our thoughts are around that, how we can start to tap into that. And what I saw in our breakouts for the icebreaker is after we got through the questions, the dots were already starting to be connected around, oh, I know someone who's doing this. This is a cool thing. Can you send me your email? Like, let's figure out how we can work together. And that is the piece that we often overlook when we're thinking about philanthropy. We think about it as that big P philanthropy. And I think oftentimes philanthropy, and this is me coming from inside that system, often lacks the courage and conviction to move quickly and rapidly in that and respond in that organic way that is so beautiful with mutual aid. For example, in May of 2020, in Minneapolis, where I live and have lived for the last 10 years, George Floyd was murdered by the police. In the immediate aftermath, of course, the aftershock, mutual aid exploded, blossomed. It really, it stepped forward as the way in which we could resource and fund our movements. It was, how can we, get communication lines out and connected around protests? How can we deliver food and other basic necessities for both protesters and families traumatized or individuals traumatized by the events? And communities were activated. They moved quickly, and these systems were intricate, but also simple in such a clean and or such a clear and direct way. Communities responded quickly. And as I said, both fortunately and unfortunately, those are often born out of tragedy and horror. And so in that, how can we take those lessons learned and apply them to times when we're not necessarily amidst significant tragedy? And I think also when thinking about this ecosystem, it is important to recognize that all of these do exist and they often play off of each other. For example, PFund Foundation, my organization, we were able to provide immediate assistance right after the outbreak of the pandemic for folks across the region, both nonprofits, small businesses, and also individuals, in order to provide direct resources in an immediate kind of sense. And so how can we parse out these different pieces without necessarily ignoring that they all exist? Okay, so now this is the part. So as Barry said, my master's thesis was on white supremacy and philanthropy and development in the United States. And I'm pretty much going to boil, 300 or 400 years worth of history into one slide, which is it's pretty unfair and really will gloss over. I'm going to do my best to just kind of provide the context, because I think it's important for us to recognize what led us to this moment and what we can learn from those lessons. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat here. Oh, sorry. So when white Europeans colonized North America, it was born out of religious persecution in Europe at the time. Primarily the Puritans, kind of were the first wave of colonizers as they landed on the eastern seaboard of the United States, or what will eventually become the United States. In that, they developed a system. Some people might know it's called the City on the Hill sermon, done by John Winthrop in 1630. It's kind of a famous speech. Got off the boat and essentially, provided this sermon that was really the first example we see in kind of in the colonial era of philanthropy and the necessity for oh, sorry, is everyone else seeing the slides? I'm just seeing, can I get a nod or anything? Is everyone seeing the slides? Okay, I've got some people saying yes. Okay, Ming, I don't know if maybe you can help Stephen out there. I apologize.
Sorry, I can't quite figure it out, but I'm chatting with Stephen. Okay,
great. What I'll tell you, Stephen, is not a lot going on the slide right now. It's a lot of words, so you can, as you listen. But anyway, so during this colonial era, this sermon is essentially a plea that begs the question that it's really critical for this in-group to, which is white colonial, Europeans, colonizers, to recognize that in order for their society to thrive and prosper, and honestly to ensure their own power and control of the region, they need to support the weakest members from within their in-group. And that's from the elements, from famine, from disease, things like that, but also from what they define as an out-group, which at the time was, were the native and indigenous groups in that area. And so it's you start to see that philanthropy is used as a tool to consolidate power. And that tradition carries on and is really baked in through the colonial era, as civil society within, white society at the time started to really build up these structures around colleges and universities, it's hospitals, these things in order to ensure that, if you think of it as a flock of sheep, the sheep on the outer edges, how do we protect those in order to ensure that they all survive? And that becomes a very integral part of how philanthropy builds over the years. There's examples of, the American Colonization Society, which was started by a number of founding fathers and some other industrialists and members of the US government. They started this nonprofit that was meant to repatriate formerly enslaved African Americans back to Africa, many of which had never been to Africa, many generations removed, in order to reduce the voting population of the United States and to reduce the number of formerly enslaved African Americans in the country. So they're using these tools, this like philanthropic idea that, oh, we're helping support, their own country to be built in Liberia in Africa as under this mode of philanthropy as a way to continue to consolidate power. At the turn of the century, so I'm glossing over, 100 years here, so bear with me here. In the age of industrialization and what's considered the golden age of philanthropy, so that's Carnegie, that's Rockefeller, that's these kind of white industrialists, the people who built the railroads and did all these things, started accumulating unknown amounts of wealth for the era, especially in the United States at the time. And in that, really recognize that in order to continue to amass that wealth and maintain that power, it was really critical for them to what's kind of considered, what they call Americanization, but really it's whitewashing, essentially removing any deviation from this kind of white norm, and doing so through things like IQ tests. IQ tests were developed through this era in order to show that there is a working class based on IQ, based on like intelligence, that there are smart people and there are not smart people, and those smart people should work. It's a great way to ensure that you've got laborers for the rest of your business. Similarly, the temperance movement and prohibition were really centered around the idea that if we remove the ability for Eastern Europeans, for African Americans, for other immigrant populations to meet and convene in these spaces that were private, aka bars, taverns, pubs, then they would have less of an opportunity to unionize, to organize, to share ideas and build community. And all of these things have been baked into this idea of this like Americanization of like these minority groups. And so what we're seeing with these two kind of facets is that there's an in-group and there's an out-group. That was kind of the foundation. And then how can we continue to reduce this out-group to not gain any power or wealth or connection or community? And that's something that we see within the LGBTQ community. It's something that is critical to our oppression. And this is not to say that philanthropy and all money given by organizations like that are inherently evil or corrupt or meant to harm. There's lots of amazing things that happen because of the transfer of resources from someone who's got a lot of resources to someone who's less resources. But it does beg the question of what are the systems in place? What are the structures in place that are preventing us from actually achieving power and control over our own experience? And so with that, we kind of go back to that giving ecosystem and really start to shift from this competition model, which Vu Le, Nonprofit AF, an amazing kind of commentator and author on all things nonprofit, totally recommend his work, labels it as the nonprofit Hunger Games, that we're all fighting for these tiny crumbs of resources, that we're all competing against each other, that there's not enough space for everyone. But in fact, as we see with mutual aid, what we see with how our communities come together, there's actually a lot of opportunity there for cooperation. And I think queer people are uniquely positioned. We're relationship builders. We have to code switch in order to figure out who around us is also part of the community. And so in that, we kind of foster these unique connections with folks. And we're also a community that hails from every demographic, every race, ethnicity, every age, every socioeconomic class, every location. LGBTQ people are part of all groups. And in that, we get this vibrancy, this exciting opportunity to learn from each other, to grow from each other. And so to kind of lean into this idea of a cooperation model does take a shift. And that's not to say that, once you start believing in this, money will start falling, from the sky, but it does start to help reframe how we look at how we address our issues. And that's also to say that PFund, we have to continue to increase how much money we're, sending out the door. That is definitely my mission with my organization, but also knowing that, we have these other ways in which we can connect and build is a both and. So with that, what are the lessons that from queer and other marginalized communities that we can apply more broadly to philanthropy? So like looking at how has this happened before? Have we done this? And if so, what can we learn from them? And when we get into the breakout sessions, I would love to hear people have other examples where they've seen this. And honestly, if your organization's done it, or if you were part of a campaign that did something really cool, or if you have seen it in a non-LGBT context, but think it would be that's the place to do it. So we think about it in terms of working inside and outside of systems. This is a photo of Peter Staley here, who was part of ACT UP. And ACT UP was an organization in the 1980s that, and beyond, that really took to unique ways of protesting the mistreatment and ignorance around HIV/AIDS and the government's response to it. And they did big, bold campaigns and protests in order to achieve kind of their, to get the word out. And in that, it garnered enough attention that they were able to work actually along somebody that we probably all know very well now, and many of you probably know from that time. But Dr. Anthony Fauci at the time was at the FDA and really supported working with ACT UP to create this, what's called a parallel track approach, which is like an approval system. I'm looking at my notes so I don't mess this up, but it shortens the amount of time for new drugs to be tested and allowed on the market, which is something that now has allowed for things like the vaccine for coronavirus and other drugs and things that have come up since that time. And so our queer communities, united and built this campaign around their shared kind of need for survival. And in that, we're able to garner enough attention to kind of work alongside the FDA and kind of within that system. And secondly, this is probably an image that many of you remember, but I think the thing to think about here is the fight for marriage equality. This movement and the campaigns that were part of it really were instrumental in kind of shifting our thinking around how to approach a topic and how to approach that work. The point I want to make here is that a lot of the initial work being done to address or try to move the needle on this work was really around the idea of civil rights and the messaging that around legal rights and kind of the more structural things, kind of things within the system. And that didn't always resonate with folks. And what organizers across, I know, our region and across the country really started to have to shift how they think about their work. And in that, starting to frame campaigns around queer families and how those families are comprised of humans who want the love and connection and community that comes with things like marriage. And that's not to say, marriage is this monolith that, now that it's been, marriage equality has been achieved, that we are now great and everything can pack up and go, but rather a recognition that what makes our queer community so impactful and so good is this recognition of relationship. And it took kitchen table conversations, sitting down with people that you care and love, who maybe at the time didn't agree with marriage equality, and you had to have those individual conversations. It's the same language and the same structure that's being used to increase vaccination rates around COVID-19. It's the same that's being done for other campaigns and around that. So if we can understand it around the idea that that's in a way mutual aid, in the sense that we're coming down to the grassroots level and starting to have those individual conversations rather than relying on this kind of big P philanthropy or the structures and systems and the kind of nuts and bolts. I think I'm going to admit this person. So let me move on to the next slide. So what would a holistic and cooperative approach to community building look like? How can we start to frame and think about our work ahead of us? You know, when I was in this, when we were in the breakout sessions, one of the other folks there, she asked or mentioned this SB, I'm gonna look at the number on here because I want to get it right so folks can jot it down if they want to, with the SB 2030, I think it is, which is a bill to prevent funding for North Dakota colleges if they have any partnership or connection with abortion providers. And so thinking about, you know, and the bill that just got passed and signed into law in South Dakota, preventing transgender athletes from participating in sports that align with their gender identity. We've got things happening. So how can we start to apply this idea that we can rely on relationship building, and we can start to really think about our questions and our campaigns and our movements around this framework, things that are inherently a part of us because of our experience and our identity as queer folks. And so, you know, we've kind of started thinking about this, at least at PFund, this idea of these like toolkits and these approaches. And, you know, I'll go through these, but I don't want these to be the limiting factor when we get into the discussion. I really want this to be a time, this to just be, you know, a kind of launching point. So it really is around authentic and reciprocal partnerships. You know, being from, so I can think of in the context of Minnesota, if I'm speaking just of the state that I'm in, I'm based in one of I'm in the largest metropolitan area for the state. And oftentimes we can come at our approach as an organization when working with folks from across the state, from many different geographies and sizes, that it can be extractive, that it can be one-sided. It can be, you know, setting expectations very high or very unrealistic for that relationship. And also to be able to walk in and just start, you know, start the relationship from day one. And so understanding that those take years, and also recognizing in that length of time, we have to recognize the need for sustainability. Our leaders burn out. Our leaders change hands, they move, and honestly, we can't in the Midwest afford to have folks leave our region. We need all of the bright, authentic, dynamic leaders we can get our hands on. And so how do we continue to support those leaders and those organizations in order to sustain long-term relationships? Also understanding the need for tactics to support clear campaign goals. So what are the nuts and bolts that are going to be required for us to you know, tap in and harness our innate ability to build those relationships? And then thinking systematically and holistically. So thinking about, there's a not so great metaphor, but I'm gonna alter it a little bit, so I might stumble here for a second. But you know, we think about it as we see something. Sorry, I'm really struggling here. We see something in the river, downriver, and our job is just to take those things out of the river, get them out of the river. But unless we question why those things are ending up in the river up ahead, we end up spending all of our time dealing with that. And that is something that's critical. We need to continue to, you know, remove those things, but then we need to head to the head of the river and or the top of the river and figure out why that's happening. And also understand how they interplay with each other. As a queer community, we can't isolate ourselves from straight cis folks. We can't alienate ourselves from other marginalized groups, making sure that we're centering the experiences of members within the LGBTQ community who are facing additional oppression. And then lastly, creating communities that share resources. So that means, you know, looking for how can we learn from each other? How can we continue to support each other? Secondarily, valuing accountability, being able to, you know, recognize opportunities to call people in rather than call them out. And then lastly, practice solidarity. So really thinking holistically about how all of our individual missions or the work we're doing, how it fits into your neighbor's work and how it fits into other organizations. So with that being said, I'm just going to peek ahead to that. Nope, that's not the one I want. I would love for us to break into breakout sessions, but before we do, again, just to take, and I don't have the time here. Okay. I think we've got, maybe we take 10 minutes here to go into breakout rooms to discuss how we can start to tap into this mutual aid model, this while also recognizing the pieces of philanthropy and how those can also exist and continue to advance our movements. I know those are big questions, and I know 10 minutes isn't really, but this is to start to build those connections and to see where all of your work intersects and overlaps. I think I'll leave the PowerPoint off because the next slide just says, what did you all talk about? Does anyone want to share a few sentences or a cool point or something that they feel energized by? You're welcome to put something in the chat if you want to, and I can read it out loud, or you can unmute. Barry, I saw that you unmuted, so I'm going to make you go for it.
Well, I think we talked about that. This is really, I mean, I feel like this whole summit, we were talking about with the fact of having Indigenous presentation at the beginning to set us off to really, if there's a shift of thinking of things that you continue to build on. And I don't think that I can even begin I just need to let it sift over me to really think about this because everything has worked, like you said, 400 years has worked to where we are today and how we function. That whole competition of survival of the fittest, whether that's a person or a nonprofit, and so we've all bought into it. And so how do we shift away from that and say no? We're gonna work on a new model here that I'm only beginning to glimpse. So that was a real processing time for our group.
That's great, Barry. Thank you for saying that. And I just saw Representative Ocasio-Cortez was just talking about something kind of similar on her social media, and I happened to catch it. It's this idea that folks want us to think that everything is bad in the world right now. They want us to be tired. They want us to feel isolated and alone. They want us to feel hopeless. And that is a ploy. That's marketing. And so when we get to have time and we carve out space to be together like this, and we get to hear presentations, and I'm not even saying mine, but the ones you all have gotten to be a part of, are an opportunity to start to see that good things are happening. This news about Pope Francis, that is going to impact young LGBTQ kids across the world and in North Dakota. It's going to make a difference for those folks because people listen to the Pope. But that's all to say that we've got this really cool opportunity to build connections with each other, and the point is that we're in communion with each other. Not to have that play on words, but we're here together, and we get this opportunity, and that's what makes us stronger. Is when we are not isolated, when we're not hopeless. And so to be able to lean into that and recognize that everything that as Barry said, the last 400 years plus has worked very hard to prevent us from doing this. And yet here we are doing this work, which is very exciting. So thank you, Barry. Does anyone else have something? I think Stephen, I see.
Yeah, something that was very helpful for me and probably for my group. I'm a co-chairman for the Red River Rainbow Seniors in Fargo and Moorhead. And talking the other person in my room, there were only two of us, by the way, so we had plenty of chance to talk. Anyway, his suggestion was, he said, wouldn't it be great if seniors could be matched up with students in the GSAs in high schools, which is something I hadn't thought of before. So, I mean, that's helpful for our group because we've been talking about how can we reach out and use the resources we have to help other groups. So anyway, so it was worth coming just for that. Not to say anything against your presentation.
No, I'm just here to provide the space
Anyway,
for those natural,
yeah.
those organic connections to come up.
Yeah.
And both groups or both organizations or both communities will get a chance to do something different that they haven't before because of those connections, because of our relationship.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm seeing one comment here that I'll just read out loud. Groups can ally with each other around the shared experience of lack of power equality. I'll let that kind of wash over folks. Anyone else here? And we don't, there's no pressure to share, but if you've got anything that was really cool or exciting. And I think it's important too to recognize that you don't have to be, an employee of an organization or the head of a group or anything in order to be able to start to foster those relationships. How are you connecting with folks? How are you showing up on your social media presence? How are you building those relationships with family and friends? I think there's lots of opportunity there. Well, with that being said here, I don't think we're going to make it all the way to 7:30. I'm a fast talker. When I practiced it, I was very slow, but then of course I get here and I speed read. So just some final thoughts as I close.
Aaron, could I interject?
Of course.
I think something that I would ask everybody on this call, and I will interject with everyone else on the summit, is to be thinking about this summit doesn't end tomorrow night. The summit projects into the future. And so how we create that future from the 155 people that registered into the summit is ours in the making. And I think, again, this information can help inform that vision of what we do. But I really would challenge everybody to really be thinking about where do we want this to take us. So think about this between now and tomorrow and the day after, because we really want this to be something that doesn't end when we say, nice summit, good to see you. Where do we go? So anyway, there.
Perfect. So for the next couple of things here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share some resources that PFund Foundation. I just want to make sure that those get out there for folks. Next, then we'll open it up to questions, and I'll just share some final thoughts. So there is going to be time for more broad questions here, and they can be about the presentation, or you can ask each other questions. Keep it very open. But I'm going to share my screen again just so you all can see this slide here. I wonder if it's going to let me go from this slide. It is. I'm a technology hero here. So the first thing I want to just share about quickly is our PFund Foundation scholarships. That scholarship application opened on January 15th, so just a few days ago, and it will be open until March 15th. These are grants size, $1,000 up to $12,000. We have about 30 to 40 different scholarship funds. You apply to one application, and then we match you up with your the scholarships you qualify for, because we have scholarships for students who are studying, undergraduate education, either in a two-year or four-year capacity, graduate students, PhD PhD programs. But it also includes leadership development. It includes credentials. If you wanted to become an EMT, or if you want to go to the Rockwood Institute, there's definitely scholarships for that available too. We try to keep it as open as possible. Additionally, we have specific scholarship funds. So like if you're studying things like math or business or STEM, a lot of performing arts and fine arts scholarships. There's library studies, there's journalism and new media, there's all these things. So, and the scholarships are not bound by age other than being an adult. So you have to be 17 as of June 1st of this upcoming year. So that way you're kind of going into school as an adult. But we do even have a scholarship specifically for LGBTQ seniors. So we have to award to someone who identifies as an LGBTQ senior. The only three qualifications are you have to be 17 plus after that June 1st date. You have to identify as LGBTQ. And 3, you have to be either from or attending a program in one of our 5 states. So you can be from Southern Wisconsin and going to school at NDSU. You can be from Minot and going to school in Iowa State or at Harvard or the University of Beijing. You know, you can be going to any program as long as you're from within the 5 states or you're going to school within the 5 states or attending a program. We encourage you to apply on our website, pfundfoundation.org/apply. Send it to folks, share it with folks on our social media. You can always share our posts. We have a Facebook, we have a Twitter, we have a LinkedIn, and we have an Instagram. So definitely follow us, PFund Foundation, for all of those. That's the bottom point. The next one I want to talk about, and I think this really aligns with our conversation today. PFund Foundation was just awarded funds from a partner to provide grants for rural LGBT organizations across our region. This is an opportunity for 501c3 nonprofits, so more traditional nonprofits, and we're also taking on fiscal sponsored projects as well. Grants for those folks for general operating support, but then also to provide opportunity for those connections. We're asking that 10% of those funds for each of the member programs be designated towards either their chief lead, like their chief executive officer, executive director, or board chair, main volunteer, whoever, you know, is kind of that key person, to join us on a monthly Zoom call in order to start fostering those relationships and to really start to build that mesh, that kind of constellation of these amazing organizations across the region. The Midwest is still the least funded region in the country for LGBTQ folks. It's like 1/4 of 1 cent of every dollar makes it into the hands of LGBTQ folks in our region. And that number is actually probably just decreasing, as we've seen in recent years. And so it's ever more critical for us to get resources into the hands of organizations advancing that work. That application will open in the summer of 2022. And we'll have more information on our website as we get some of that. We just were awarded the funds a couple of weeks ago. So we're excited to be able to do that. And then, so those are the opportunities. Again, pfundfoundation.org for those. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here because I'd like to open it up to questions. Questions about those resources I just talked about, my talk, you know, whatever you want. I'm happy to answer if there are any.